Hello family, it's African Esquire and I'm here with a new video. So I want to talk briefly about the incident that happened recently in Philadelphia. If you have not heard, two African men were sitting at a Starbucks in Philly, and they were, I believe, real estate brokers, and they were waiting for one of their colleagues to show up at the Starbucks, and while they were waiting, they were essentially arrested by the police. And this has caused, of course, mass outrage and mass protests. I just seen that the manager of the Starbucks, it looks like he has been fired. The actual Starbucks where the incident happened, it looks like they have fired him. In addition, there are people going into the establishment to actually protest and raise hell to the point where the store had to close. So how do we look at situations like this when they happen? There's so many ways you can look at it, and I'm going to narrow them down into three ways that you essentially can. The first way I would say is the integrationist mindset. That is essentially the mindset of most of us, and that is that we feel like we should be able to go into these white establishments and not have to worry about being discriminated, being profiled. We should be treated as every other patron. We should be considered as any other customer. We are paying money. We are people who are professionals. We're not, people doing up to no good. We're just going there basically to get some coffee and have a business meeting. We're going there for the same purpose that you white people go to these same places. Therefore, you should give us the same dignity and respect. Now, this, of course, brings up a lot of the feelings of our past, of what has happened before us, and that is our ancestors have fought to get into these establishments, fought to be treated equally inside of these establishments, these white-owned establishments. And as you have, I'm sure, seen, if you look back at protests like in the 60s with SNCC or different groups, and if you look back at the humiliation that they were going through just to be able to go to these white establishments, I mean, you had some of them sitting at countertops and these white people are just spitting on them, they're cussing on them, they're smearing food to their face, all types of horrendous things, beating them up, beating them to a pulp, and doing all these things. And these people, to them, this was worth the struggle of being able to integrate into the system. And also, there was a strategy behind it, of course. The strategy was, if you showed the world how vile the South is and how racist it is, that they would be forced to look at themselves and see what they are, see the hate that they give out, and when they have the whole international community looking down on them, that will essentially make them reflect. It happens for some people, and for most, it obviously does not. So that's a lot of the integrationist mindset. However, the Black nationalist mindset, and I do identify myself as a Black nationalist, is that why would we go to these places where we're not welcome? Why would we even if you want to go to there, once you see that they're going to disrespect you, once you see that they're going to treat you like you're nothing, why would I even give them my money? Why would I want them to make it right? Why would I not look for a Black establishment, a Black store, a black coffee shop? And this is in Philly, and I know there are lots of Black institutions there, and I'm very sure there's a Black coffee shop somewhere in Philly, multiple Black coffee shops. So the Black nationalist mindset would be that if you want to protest, do not go in there physically and protest. Do not use your voice. Do not use signs. Do not do all these things that try to raise hell. The best way to protest is to use your dollar. And if anything, use your dollar as a means to convict those people who treated you wrong. You don't even have to stop at just you yourself going to a Black institution. You can also encourage others. You could raise awareness for, if you have people in the white community who also feel similarly that what happened in the Philadelphia Starbucks was unfair, you could also raise awareness with them and say, hey, you say you're against racism, why are you supporting Starbucks? So you can, garner mass economic boycotts, not just with you, but with the white community. The white community, of course, it would probably be a temporary thing until you get some type of symbolic thing done by Starbucks, whether it's a statement or a coalition that they're going to start on race relations. These are the things that they do to remedy racism. But for Black people, our ultimate thing should be, regardless of what you do, we're going to give our money to people who look like us, people who support us, and people who we don't ever have to worry about discriminating against. And so that would be the Black nationalist way to take this. And the third way is the Pan-Africanist way. And as much as I identify myself as a Black nationalist, I'm also a Pan-Africanist. So while I believe that Blacks, we need to control the economics of our community while we are in the United States, ultimately, after you get control of your community, we have to ask the serious question, and that is, will we ever be able to live in America, live in the United States of America, and be treated with true dignity by the dominant society? Is that really probable? Is it probable that there will be a day, even if there are Black institutions and Black communities that are economically viable, in that case scenario, are we really of the belief that white people are not going to mess with us? And we should know, at least from our history, which is, Black Wall Streets or different Black economic communities. It wasn't just Black Wall Street. That's the one we always talk about. But there were multiple Black communities all over the United States that were like basically the same thing. Black Wall Streets, Black businesses, Black institutions, and they were the representation of Black nationalism. These were Black people who controlled their local communities and controlled the politics and the money and the social institutions, control all of those things inside of their local communities. So that does happen, or it has happened, but at the end of the day, Black Wall Street still had to deal with the racist American system that it existed under. So Pan-Africanism would say that yes, you can give your money in the meantime to Black institutions, but ultimately you have to have a goal of seeing a liberated Africa. And the reason why is two. One, if you are of African descent and you want to go back to Africa, you should have that option. You should have the option to go back to Africa and not have to deal with corruption, not have to deal with depleted resources, not to have to deal with puppet dictators who are put in these nations that we're told are democratically elected, but they're always chosen by the Western power that basically seeks influence over that region. You should have the option, if you want to go back to Africa, to go back and to not have to live a life with less dignity, not have to live a life that is enslaved still, because even if you do go back to Africa, the continent as it stands in 2018 is still equally as much as you going back to slavery, honestly, as you would be as you are here in America. It's no more liberated, because yes, you're going back to the homeland, and I'm sure it feels good, and I'm sure it represents something. W.E.B. Du Bois, he died in Africa. I'm sure that represented something to him. But at the same time, if Africa is not able to control its own resources, if different African nations are not able to control their own economies, if they're basically being threatened by the United States companies or the CIA or whoever to comply with the United States, or else you will face you could face a coup, or you can face assassination. As long as that state exists, you're not really escaping colonialism. You're not escaping slavery. You're going from one type of slavery to another. And what I'm saying is that ultimately the goal of Pan-Africanists would say that ultimately at some point, I would like to return to a free Africa and be able to live a life of dignity there. The other option is, not all Pan-Africanists necessarily think that you have to go back to Africa. Me personally, I want to, as an individual, go back to Africa. But even if you aren't someone who feels like you have to go back to Africa, some people feel like, this is our home, so we're just as much entitled to this place as we are to any other place. And if that is the case, then you should have the luxury of knowing that if the United States government practices racism, practices any exploitative practices on you as an individual, that you are not only you do not only rely on the United States government to appeal for your human rights on your behalf. You should know that the entire continent of Africa is liberated to the point where they can also appeal on your behalf. They could speak for you. So when any other people, whenever we are facing crisis of human rights, we know that we can always go to our, like if I were Latino, or if I'm Mexican, like I could go to Mexican government and say, I need you to represent me. If I was Indian, I could go to the Indian government and say, they're doing this to my community. We need you to speak up for us in the UN. We should have that same luxury as African people. And so basically the Pan-Africanist view of what happened in Philly would be that the only true and complete remedy to that situation would be that Africa be free. Therefore, if Africa is free, you could either go back to Africa, or you can know that you have someone that's going to represent your human rights on an international forum. So those are three ways that you can look at them. Again, I subscribe to the last two. I consider myself a Black nationalist, but also a Pan-Africanist. But many people, their initial way of reacting to things is to be reactionary and to protest the institution, but they're protesting with the intention of eventually going back to that institution and buying coffee with them, or maybe going to a Starbucks down the street. And, me personally, that's not what I'm into. To me, if I'm really against something, like, I'm not going to do a temporary boycott. I'm not going to just go to the one down the street. To me, like, if it's really that real, like, it's really that real, let's actually carry this out until we get something that's meaningful and get something that's actually going to help remedy the situation altogether. But anyways, those are my thoughts on the incident in Philly. I would like to know yours and what you think the ultimate solution would be to these instances of discrimination that our people face day to day.